Hello, in today's drawing, we are going to be drawing nature. I'm going to start by drawing a mountain first, so I'm going to focus on the mountain, and that will be part one of the video. And then I'm going to move to drawing the trees and the lake, and so on and so forth. So depending on how long these videos are, I might have 2 to 3 parts. Okay, so first part will be the mountain. All right, so before I actually get started with drawing a mountain, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna simply explain a little bit how the shading of the mountain works. So one way to think of a mountain is kind of like a pyramid, a 3D pyramid, more specifically a triangular pyramid. Okay, so if I were to draw kind of like a triangle shape without doing the bottom, I could do a line in the middle like so, and that makes it resemble a pyramid. Now, you could do this kind of a technique with a mountain as well. Of course, the lines are not going to be this straight. Mountains are never this perfect. But what this will allow us to do is it will allow us to make one side or shade one side like so, while not shading the other side, and this will create a three-dimensional look to the drawing. All right, so anytime we're gonna draw kind of like a peak, so I could make another peak, we're also gonna have another slope down, and then somewhere in the middle, now it doesn't have to be perfectly down, it could be a little to the side, we're gonna draw a line. Now the shading part, depending on which side we choose to put the light in, that's gonna be the side that's not gonna be shaded. So for example, in this case, I shaded this side of the pyramid. That means the light is coming from this direction. Therefore, this side does not get any shading or very minimal shading. So most of the shading happens on the opposite side, the side that does not see the light. Okay, so this is the side that we would shade. Similarly here, this is the side that's facing kind of the light, so I would shade this part. Okay, now again, this is not going to be our mountain. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of how the shading works. With the mountain, we're going to keep our hand a little loose, also a bit lighter. You can see these lines are quite dark. I'm going to try and go very gently with my pencil. Now the pencil I'm using today to start this drawing is just an HB. That's one of the softest, weakest pencils, and it's very good to kind of start a drawing with because the lines are not very dark, so they're very easy to erase. So in case I make a mistake, I can always erase it. Now you could easily do this drawing with just a regular number 2 pencil. This one is an HB2, so it has a little bit of B, I believe stands for black, so it has a little bit of darkness in it. So it has, you could easily use this pencil. You don't need a specialized drawing pencil. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and proceed to our drawing. All right, so all right, so similarly, the way I started this video, I'm gonna go ahead and draw a mountain shape here. Now I'm not sure what it would look like. I'm thinking about doing 2 peaks. So a peak over here and a slight smaller peak over here. Now I'm gonna keep a much looser hand because a mountain will never have straight sides. So you can easily just kind of, as you're drawing this, you can kind of move your pencil up and down a little bit so it's not perfectly straight. And again, I don't have an exact picture in mind, so I'm kind of just going with it. Let's see, maybe do a slight smaller peak here. No, maybe I'll just leave it over here. Okay, so I kind of drew three peaks or 3 pyramids. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and do the central line, the line that will allow us to kind of shade one of the sides. Now I'm gonna use the light, or I'm gonna choose this side to have the light So the light is coming this way. Therefore, this side of the mountain will be light. The other side will be dark. All right, so with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and now again, I'm not gonna make a straight line. I'm gonna slowly, similarly to the way I drew the mountain, I'm gonna go to the side. Now you could go straight down and then lift it back up to kind of create kind of almost like a wave. And that's quite all right. In fact, you want to do it imperfectly because the mountain, like I said, does not have straight lines. And I could do something similar here. I'm gonna go ahead and go a little bit this way. There we go. It's a little too similar. Maybe I'll change it up a little bit. So this one will be just, all right, kind of like that. Okay, now for every single peak that's kind of sticking out, you can draw a side to that, kind of like so. So we're sort of creating smaller peaks within that mountain. You could have done it the other way if you prefer. Now, because I have the light this way, I almost want to keep this side somewhat flat while give more details where I'm going to be shading. You could also go ahead and draw a line down here. This line will kind of let you know where the shaded side ends and where the light side begins. But you don't need to do the lines over here. You can kind of let the shading do that for you. In fact, the goal here is to eventually cover these lines that I drew by using shading. So the shading will allow us to tell us where one side of the mountain ends and the other side begins. All right. If you leave the lines be visible, the drawing will look a little bit more cartoonish. If they blend in with the shading, it will look more realistic. All right, so with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and start shading. Now, what I like to do when it comes to shading is I shade right at the edge on the, of course, on the side that is facing away from the light source, from our sun, pretty much. So I'm gonna go ahead and shade on this side. Now, as far as the shading is concerned, you can go in many different directions. And I usually don't have a specific side that I shade or direction that I shade. Kind of just move my pencil. If your hand is very heavy, try to not use a lot of strength. Okay, the shading in the beginning should not be very dark, because if you make a mistake or change your mind, it's going to be very difficult for you to kind of change the shading that you've created. So keep it relatively loose and light. Okay. So I'm shading near the peaks and going down the edge of the line. And usually that's where I start with making the darkest for now. And the main reason why that tends to look a little darker, or I like to make it a little darker, is because wherever the shading starts and the light ends, that's usually where you have the most contrast. And that's where you can go ahead and make it a little darker. Okay. I'm gonna speed up the video anytime I don't have to say anything instructive. So again, I am following these lines that I drew, and I'm making that darker. As you can kind of tell now, it's giving, it's starting to look more and more like a mountain. And yeah, so start at the peak and work your way down the line. It's okay if the shading is not perfect. Now, if you look over here, I am making a little bit of shading, then I'm leaving a space. The reason why I did that is because at these sections, the line was a little bit flatter, which means there is a chance that the light might hit those two areas. So if it's too sharp down, the light will not hit it, but if it's a little bit flatter, the light might reach it. So this side is sharp, it's sloping down, so I shade that. This is almost flat, I don't shade that as much. And then it goes down again, so I shade that. And it creates a little bit of a contrast within the side of the mountain. It gives it a little bit more texture, it makes it a little bit more realistic. Now I'm also going a little darker. So when I get to the edge here, I'm making the side that's behind this peak a little darker because it's a little bit further away and it's a little bit further into the shade. Okay, so at least that's the thinking behind it. The further in is, the darker it gets. So it's further away from us. Now, sometimes you could do the opposite. Sometimes when you want to make something seem closer, you make it darker. So that's why I usually do the edges very dark, but I also make the areas that are far away very dark. The edges that are closer to us get darker because the details are a little bit more visible. But at the same time, as things go further around, further into shade, they're less visible, so they also get dark. So you got to be a little careful not to get carried away a little bit. But if you do, that's fine too. This is a tutorial video. You are here to learn. It's okay if you make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect. Now, what you could also do is you could draw cracks within the side of the mountain, so it's not perfectly straight line, like so. And it adds a little bit more, it's not gonna be, it adds a little bit more of a texture, of course. So the main concept you need to understand here is that you could just keep it very simple, quite honestly. Two sides. The side that's in the shade, as you can see, my hand here is darker. The side that's in the light, it's lighter. Okay, and that's pretty much what I'm doing here. You don't need to make this many different tones. You can keep it quite simple at first, and as you get better and better, then you can add more and more variety to your shading. Just remember, think of a triangular pyramid. One side gets shaded, the side that's away from the sun, the side that's in the sun doesn't get as much shading. You can create like crevices, lines within it, but you don't want to make them very dark. You want to kind of keep it light. So you could add texture, but without going too dark. So I decided I went a little too dark over here. So anytime you are unhappy with the darkness, you can always go back and fix it. Okay, felt that was a little too dark for this peak, and it was taking away from the background. So I'm gonna swap it out. I'm gonna make the background darker here and the peak a little lighter. So everything that's behind that, it's gonna be darker than what's closer to us. Okay, you just got to be very careful when you erase shading because sometimes you can smudge a little too much. So if you do it carefully, you can avoid any major issues, and it will be blending in anyways with the shading. So it's no big deal. There we go. I like that better that way. So yeah, anytime you're not happy with the shading, you can always go back, erase a little bit, see how the new shading looks. And voila, that's much better. I'm gonna do the same here, make darker the background and the peak in front a little lighter. The edges are dark because they're right next to the light, so they will always look a little darker than the rest. Now, if you find that your shading is way too solid, meaning one tone, you could use an eraser to kind of go back and like remove some of the shading. You just got to be careful not to smudge it too much. And if you do, it's no big deal, of course. We're here to learn, to improve our drawing skills and our shading. I'm gonna go a little heavy, darker on the background here, actually. Now, throughout this time, I've been using the not very strong pencil, just the HB. So this is what I kind of wanted to show people, that you don't necessarily need the professional dark pencils like the 4B or the 6B. You could easily get a lot of dark tones by just using the just a regular pencil you can buy at any store. So my goal right now is to kind of cover these lines, the edges. They should only be visible only on the sides that are not shaded yet. The sides that do get shaded need to kind of merge with the line, so the line should no longer be visible. Okay, these lines here will help me know where the sky starts and the mountain begins. That's why it's okay to be visible, but this right here, they will have to merge with the shading. So I'm going to have to either make the shading a little darker here, or I have to go back with the eraser and make it softer. So I'm going to do probably a little bit of both. I'm going to make it a little darker, and I'm going to go with the eraser and erase some of the lines. I'm going to go ahead and swap to the 2B. Now the 2B is a little darker, and it will help me get some of the darker tones in. This side right here doesn't have a lot of texture, so I'm gonna add a peak there. So all I do is just erase part of it. So I'm totally doing this out of my own imagination. That's why it's kind of, I'm changing things up as I go along, seeing where the light hits, seeing how I feel about it. If you follow certain techniques, you will always get a good result. The main thing is understanding the side that needs to be shaded versus the side that is not shaded, and just kind of going along with it, just seeing where the shading leads you. Some areas will look beautiful. You will get some spots that you really enjoy and some spots not so much, and with more and more practice, you will get better and better, and you will be happy with your overall result in general. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to shade a little bit on this side, not as much, just a little bit, just to kind of add a little bit of texture on the side where the sun is hitting the mountain. See, over here I defined it too much, and I don't like that. I like more of the smooth contrast, so I'm going to go back with the eraser. I'm going to remove some of that excess shading and smudge it in a little bit. Okay, well, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop here. This is part 1 of the nature drawing. In the next part, I'm going to add in the trees and the lake to this drawing. All right, with that, please make sure you like, subscribe, and leave any comments, any suggestions, any thing that you would like me to explain better